This is a new Audi Q7, and it is a fantastic luxury family SUV for families who cannot subject their children to regular SUVs from brands like Toyota and Honda and Mazda. Today, I'm going to show you a few of the things that make the Q7 so great. I rented this Q7 here in New Orleans using Turo, which is a service that lets you rent other people's cool and interesting and special cars instead of your typical normal boring rental cars. You can sign up for Turo using the link in the description below and get $25 off your first Turo rental. Now, I chose to rent the Q7 because it's gotten a lot of press since it came out for the 2017 model year, mostly related to how good it is. So I wanted to see if it was any good myself. Now, here's a brief overview. The Q7 has 3 rows of seats, and it comes with 2 available engines. Base models use a 250 horsepower turbocharged 4-cylinder, but there's also an optional 333 horsepower supercharged V6, which is what this one has. This one also has a bunch of cool luxury features and some interesting quirks, so today I'm going to show you around it and show you a few of my favorites. Then I'm going to get it out on the road and drive it, and then I'm going to give it a Doug score. Now I'm going to start with a few of the Q7's features, both good and bad, and then I'm going to move into some of its more unusual quirks. Now, unquestionably, the best feature in this car is the virtual cockpit system, which basically is a giant full-color screen in the gauge cluster where your car just has a regular old speedometer. This thing gives you the option to have basically anything in there, including this incredibly detailed 3D map, so that when you're driving around somewhere, you can look precisely on the map and see from your point of view exactly where you are from like a bird's eye. It is a really great feature, and in fact it is the best of these features in the entire car industry. Now, another good feature of the Q7, like I mentioned, has 3-row seating, which makes it great for families who need a few extra seats than a regular SUV. This is one of the primary things that distinguishes it from the smaller Q5. Now, one cool thing about the 3-row seating is that when you're in the back and you need more cargo space, all you got to do is press a little button back here and then the seats fold down. Now, that isn't especially unusual. A lot of new luxury SUVs with 3 rows have rear folding seats, but here's the cool thing: you can press the button the other way and the seats fold right back up. No messing around with latches or trying to figure out what does what. Just push little buttons and the seats come up. Then you put the headrest in place and you can use them very easily. But while it is cool that the Q7 can raise or lower its 3rd row of seats automatically in the back with a push of a button, even that is becoming somewhat common in the world of 3-row SUVs. But the Q7 takes the convenience one step further. You can also raise or lower the 3rd row with a set of buttons located back here. So if you're fumbling around in the 2nd row of seats and you realize you need the cargo space in the 3rd row, you can just drop the 3rd row of seats without having to walk all the way to the back. Or maybe even more useful, if you're going somewhere and turns out you have more children going with you than you think, you can just come back here, and as you're loading some children in, you can raise those back seats so that they're ready to load in even more without having to walk around to the back. It's a really good idea. It's worth noting, by the way, that the Q7 has those electronic controls to raise or lower the 3rd row on both the driver and passenger side, which makes it even more practical. Not quite as practical, however, is simply accessing the 3rd row of seats, which frankly is a little bit disappointing. In order to get into the 3rd row of seats, you must first pull this little latch on the side of the seat, and that folds the seat back down. Then you push this little plastic thing marked push, and that pulls the entire seat bottom up, and only then can you access the 3rd row of seats. And what this means is that if you have a car seat in place, there's no way to get into the 3rd row without removing the car seat every time, folding the seat forward, then putting the car seat back in, which can be kind of annoying. Now, it is worth noting that when you push the little plastic thing in order to pull the entire seat bottom up to access the 3rd row, it isn't really heavy. It has hydraulics that sort of ease the process, so this is something that your kids can do. It doesn't take a ton of force to lift the seat forward. Still, accessing the 3rd row in this vehicle is surprisingly difficult, and so if the 3rd row is something you think you're going to be getting into a lot, I would look into a minivan. But that third row of seat access is really one of the very few drawbacks I've found with this vehicle. There are a lot of other benefits, mostly related to technology. One I love, the heads-up display is very good. A lot of them are now. One interesting thing is it shows the speed limit. It can detect what the speed limit is. That's not too uncommon. The thing I like is it even can show when you're in a school zone and the speed limit has decreased and it says school in yellow, so you know to slow down. That is pretty cool. But the tech goes well beyond that. This car has everything: adaptive cruise control, forward collision braking, lane keep assist, blah, blah, blah. This is one of the most high-tech new SUVs. Next, I want to move on to some of my favorite weird and unusual quirks of the Q7, and there is nothing weirder or quirkier than the badge. Now, Audi badges this car as the 3.0T, which on its face doesn't seem that strange. They've been using badging like this for years. There was the 1.8T turbo 4-cylinder in the 2000s on the A4. There was the 2.0T turbo 4-cylinder for years on a bunch of different cars, and now there's the 3.0T turbo V6. Except it isn't a turbo V6. This car is supercharged and not turbocharged. So they badge it as a 3.0T, T for turbo, but it's actually supercharged. Now, I've talked to people at Audi about this, and apparently they did this so they didn't confuse customers who were already used to the badging that they've done on the other cars, 1.8T, 2.0T, so they just kept the T thing alive. Still, it's funny to see it 3.0T for turbo on a non-turbo vehicle. And since I'm around back, I want to talk about another one of the most interesting quirks of the Q7. Now, in a lot of my videos, I mentioned that the federal government prevents automakers from putting a brake light on a movable piece of bodywork. It is not allowed. But I get emails all the time from people saying, well, if it's not allowed, then how come on the Audi Q7, if you open up the tailgate, as you can see, the brake light goes away and then it's gone, and it seems to violate the rule because there's this big hole where the brake light would have been? And that is a great question. Audi has figured out a really smart way around this regulation. Yes, the brake light is in the tailgate, but take a look at this. If you're on the brakes and you open up the tailgate, the moment the tailgate starts to open, the brake lights switch to the bumper. So the second the tailgate goes up and is suddenly moving, the tail lights switch to a place that is no longer moving. Therefore, the tail lights and brake lights are always illuminated, and thus this car complies with that regulation. Apparently, for design purposes, Audi felt that it would be better to integrate the brake lights into the tailgate itself, and so this was their workaround, basically creating a second set of brake lights in the bumper in order to still comply with the regulation. There are a few other cars that do this. The Lincoln MKC and MKX are like this, the Chevy Bolt is like this, and the Audi Q5 is also like this. Next up, moving back inside the Q7, there are a couple of interesting quirks that you'll notice if you spend a little time in this car, one of which is the volume knob. Now, you're driving around listening to music and you want to change the stereo volume. There is a control on the steering wheel, but in case you want to go for the more traditional control on the center control stack, you reach out and oh, nope, the first circle near you is the start-stop button. Okay, fine. So you move to the next circle down and well, that one changes the climate control temperature. Fine, fine. So you move to the next circle you see, and well, that one controls the infotainment system. So where is the volume knob? Well, it turns out it's all the way over by the cup holders next to the shift lever on the passenger side in sort of a no man's land in the center console. And truly it is about the third or fourth thing you would try to turn in order to actually change the volume in this car. Another interesting quirk, I mentioned before that this car has this virtual cockpit display. So it has a giant screen in the gauge cluster instead of typical gauges. And on that screen, you can get just about everything. You can get navigation, stereo information, obviously speed. And so if you therefore decide you don't need another screen, why, you can put away the screen in the middle. Just press this little button in the center control stack and the middle screen falls into the dashboard. It is, after all, redundant, and then you don't have to look at two screens and overcomplicate your life. Another interesting quirk of this car is the climate control vents. They're all pretty standard, just look like regular climate control vents, except the one in the middle of the dashboard on the passenger side. Try as I might to turn up the climate control and change it around, I can't actually get air to blow out of this vent. In fact, I don't think it's a vent. I think it might be there for style, just to sort of have this same look go across the entire dashboard. But how bizarre. It even looks like it has vents in the back, but you can't move them or control them with a vent control. I think Audi has a decorative climate control vent inside the Q7, which is really weird. And finally, one last interesting quirk of the Q7. Now, before you fold the seats down with those little buttons, you are supposed to put the headrest down. You pull this little loop, the headrest goes down, and then you can put the seat down, easy enough. But one thing I like about this car is the fact that even if you are too stupid to remember to put the headrest down, they will go down automatically. Check this out. I am putting the seat down with the headrest up, and once it gets to a certain place, the headrest goes down automatically and continues folding so it doesn't damage your seat or your headrest. Pretty good thinking, Audi. All right, now it's time to drive the Q7. So on these more Doug videos, I try to give you kind of a summary, and so here it is. The ride quality in this car is absolutely fantastic, as good as, you know, the best stuff in this class. It just feels very nice, very comfortable for all passengers. The seats are comfortable. Visibility is good. You have big mirrors and you have a lot of aids, lane keep assist, blind spot warning, etc. So that's a great thing. In terms of performance, this engine is fine. It's not a performance car. It's also not slow. It does just fine. I can imagine that the 4-cylinder, I haven't driven one, but I can imagine the 4-cylinder would feel slow. It surprises me there's even a 4-cylinder offered in this vehicle. But they no longer have the diesel, so they want to do something to improve their, their gas mileage. One of my big complaints about Audi is they are just absolutely clueless in terms of performance vehicles. There should be an RS Q7, just like there is a GL63 AMG, or GLS63 is what it's called now. Mercedes doesn't sell many of those, but they sell them at full sticker. There's a lot of demand. The fact that Audi is not making an RS4 when the M3 is so popular and the C63 is so popular, the fact that Audi's not making an RS Q5 when that segment is taking off, it's almost criminal that they're leaving these cars out. And I think a fun Q7 for people who like Audi and like this car but want more performance would be good. But instead, you're locked into this as the biggest powertrain, which in my opinion is a big, big mistake for Audi. The technology in this car is absolutely wonderful. Virtual Cockpit is the best system in the business, even still. I prefer Volvo's center touchscreen situation, but Volvo doesn't give you quite as much information, and especially good information, in the gauge cluster. And this is just fantastic. I mean, I could drive entirely in here without ever using the center control stack except to change climate controls. In terms of competitors in this segment, I think the big one that people will be comparing this car to is the Volvo XC90. The XC90, it's worth noting, is a little smaller. The XC90 is sort of a true mid-size SUV in my opinion. This kind of straddles the border between mid-size and full-size. It's about 6 inches longer than an XC90. Personally, I love the XC90. I think it's a fantastic vehicle. I think this is just as good. I think really it comes down to personal preference, which one, the looks you like better, which one, if there's a certain tech feature, something that one doesn't have, the other does, that you like better, which one color you prefer, the dealer's closer, you like the person who's selling it, whatever it is. I think at this point, those are the two best, and those are the two that I would highly recommend to people as the ones to go for in this segment. Mercedes has gotten a little outdated. The GLE, there will be a new one coming soon. There will be a new X5 coming very soon, within the next few weeks. But it's not as large as this car, and so I don't quite think they're going to be cross-shopped quite as much. But I think that the stars of this segment are Q7 and XC90, and I think the sales are reflecting that. Ultimately, this is a great vehicle, and there's nothing really negative to say about it except that third row access. This is no Suburban, it's no minivan, it's not designed for frequent third row access. It's there if you need it, but it is not intended to be if you have 4 kids and you're going back there every day to go to school or whatever. I think that it would get a little tight, and I think in that case, you got to start looking at Odyssey, Pacifica, that sort of thing. And so that's the new Audi Q7. Now, I'm not sure of the exact pricing on this one, but I suspect it's somewhere in the high $60,000 range to the low $70,000 range. That is a lot of money to spend on a family SUV. But if you're looking for a family SUV and a regular non-luxury brand just won't do, then this is an excellent choice. And now it's time to give the Q7 a Doug score. And so here's the Doug score. The Q7 holds its own against some good rivals, though I haven't reviewed too many luxury family SUVs. It's not as good as the new Lincoln Navigator and the latest Range Rover, no surprise considering the Q7 is a lot cheaper than those, but the Q7 is better than the mediocre Maserati Levante and the Jaguar F-Pace. What the Q7 can't touch is the Range Rover Velar, which is gorgeous and fun to drive, but with only 2 rows of seats, the Velar isn't as practical as the Q7. The Q7 isn't fun or fast or thrilling, but it's just a great luxury family hauler, as these scores clearly show.